This is Bringing the Darkness to the Light with Catherine Nadal, professional psychic medium.
Today's guest is David Reece. Since the late 80s, his charismatic voice has enhanced successful albums by Accept, Bangalore Choir, Bonfire, and the Sainted Sinners, among others. In addition to this, however, he has also continued to focus on his solo career. As the cover and title, Baptized by Fire, already suggests, his latest album is significantly heavier than its two predecessors. 12 new songs full of power, mature and varied. One reason for this is certainly his new band lineup. His adopted home of Italy, he found 3 highly talented creative collaborators with whom he was able to work on the songs around the clock, a paradise for a thoroughbred musician like Reece. It's a pleasure to have you on, David.
Once again, Catherine, my pleasure as well. Nice to see you.
Oh, it's so great to see you. You know, it was interesting because this past year, someone said to me, how many interviews did you do? And I said, I think I probably did more than 52 interviews last year. And they were like, wow. And I said, yeah. And they said, well, what was the feedback like? And I said, you know, it's interesting because 80% of my guests were probably music related. 20% were either witches or paranormal experts or parapsychologists. And you know, I try to keep it really, balanced, but I know more people in the music business. But the interesting part was when they started to ask me that, I went back to my Facebook Messenger and my Instagram Messenger, and I looked at a lot of the guys that had sent me questions or sent me comments, and they're not all music. Majority of them were music, though. And I had some nurses listening and an engineer listening. And I said, wow, there was 3 top people. And the first one, David Reece, that was you. A lot of people were like literally fascinated with your career and with your life, and more importantly, your story, your spirituality story, which caught a lot of people by surprise, probably. The second person was Monty A. Melnick, because he was the tour manager for the Ramones, and there's a huge fan base out there for the Ramones still. And then Spencer Drake. And Spencer Drake is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for designing 25 albums that were in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame by those artists. So it's just incredible. For me, it's like just a double honor and privilege because I love talking to you because we're friends. But there's still so much about your life that I don't even know. So, this is your conversation. So welcome.
Thank you. Where do we start?
Well,
I would like to kick it off. You being a New Yorker, with a big RIP to the wonderful David Johansen. That one kind of hit me the other day. I mean, nobody really talks about the Dolls, but the history of the New York Dolls and then the Ramones and that whole scene, the Aerosmith connection to the Dolls and the whole thing. I was like, wow. So I went to his page and I was looking at how kooky he was, but cool he was, and what he was like the guy that kicked off the whole glam thing, in my opinion. He really hit, besides Alice, and I was like, man, that guy really made an impact on rock and roll. And it was kind of sad too, because, he went into the Buster Poindexter persona, a different guy, a different life. And then but there was just something cool about him, his page, what he talks about. And, we miss you, dude. You were great.
Absolutely. It's interesting because in the early 1990s, I lived in the New York City area. And that's when he was doing his hot thing, So I had to go, and I could still see myself, everyone got to their feet because he literally would actually like run around. He was very interactive, and he would interact with the crowd, and he was full of energy, and he was just a real performer. Unfortunately, that's the only time I saw him. So for me, he was Buster Poindexter. But this past year, I've actually seen Steve Conti perform live 2 or 3 times. And Steve, of course, being connected to the New York Dolls as well. Steve is also an amazing performer, full of energy,
Absolutely.
just really incredible. I'm going to be seeing Steve probably in the next 30 days. He's playing with
Yeah.
Willie Nile. So that should be amazing show as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow. I know. So New York
Absolutely.
City, you really kind of pinpoint a particular time in history in New York City, because when I was looking at the David Johansen stuff, I actually got down a rabbit hole and started going kind of into the Sid Vicious stuff. And that was really like, I was a very young girl, but, I was always, as early as I could be, 13, 14 years old, getting my hands on a Rolling Stone magazine, and they would feature, a lot of things. But just last year, I was at an event at Generation Records down in the Village, and it happened to be a CBGB event, and Chris Franz was there. There was a lot of people there. And, everybody was kind of mentioning Punk Magazine and the influences of Punk Magazine. I think the guy from Punk Magazine may have been there. And it's just so interesting how every magazine at the time would feature like the genres and the backstories and all of that. But even more importantly, people like now, you can only find Village Voice like online. We used to get Village Voice in paper, and that was always what was going on in town, the shows, the clubs, all of that. So, yeah.
That stuff is historical. I mean, I know people that have collected those for years, and they have them wrapped in plastic. And the old Rolling Stones, the Village, Punk Magazine, those guys, ticket stubs. I mean, people from around the world used to go to CBGB just to take a photo in front of the club. Yeah, I know. And I've been inside the venue, and you would think it would be this massive thing, but it's really not. But it's historical. It's part of. It's like the Ritz. Though that whole time frame in the music business, New York City, L'Amour's, all that time, it was magic. It was just a magical period. I remember getting a limo in New York for $40 to go to L'Amour's one way. And the guy said 40 to go home, a stretch. You know what I mean? That was like 88. It was so cool. You know what I mean? It was like, wow, going through Wall Street and just going, all of us, with our heads, we're looking up because we're not New Yorkers, right? It's just a fascinating place in the universe. So, yeah, I got a lot of friends that were Dolls fanatics when I was really young. And I didn't quite get it at first. But then when I heard that one of his recordings on his page, when I say I'm in love, you best believe I'm in love, L-U-V. And I went, I remember that, Johnny Thunders and Sylvain, the whole thing, their whole image, who they were as characters. And yeah, man, they kicked a lot of doors open for what happened, like for the Poison kind of era of rock and roll. Nobody gives them the credit that they really deserve, or him. I mean, he was, in my opinion, when you see a front man, his body, his face, he kind of had the Jagger, Tyler, but he had his own thing too, you know what I mean? And then I went into the Rock Palace videos on YouTube and started watching when New York Dolls were trying to break Europe, and like, wow, what a band, man. They were cool. And the Ramones, I mean, they're still a phenomenon over here. I mean, I went to a Saxon gig the other night. I probably saw 5, 6 Ramones t-shirts. People walking around metalheads wearing Ramones shirts. And Girls School was on the bill, so of course they were big Ramones fans as well.
Well, let me just tell you that I am a big fan of Accept. Everyone knows it. Everyone knows it. I'm going to go back into the 80s just briefly because I can't help myself. I woke up this morning and turned on my cable TV, and I always turn on the metal station, which never shows bands. They just show these static pictures of like the 1980s or whatever. And a song was on, and I was kind of getting ready for my day, and I turned around, and Restless and Wild was on, and I was like, oh, Accept. I was like, it's my sign. David's going to be on my show today. I got all excited. But
ironic.
Oh, my
Crazy,
God,
yeah.
it's so amazing. And, I have to say that I wasn't into every album. Like I have friends literally that if you give them a song, they'll tell you what album, what number
Hmm.
the song is on the album. Like I have a really good
Hmm.
friend, Rich Catino. He's literally like literally could tell you like almost every album, every song, what year it came out, what the album looked like. He's just like a discologist, I guess they call it.
Hmm. Hmm.
But you know, thinking about accept, I want to ask you questions that I always think of these weird questions like, well, if I was in the band, so if you go back to the time that you were in Accept, I mean, they were huge and they had like a particular fan base. Were there like songs that you really couldn't wait to play, or were there songs that you were just like, oh, I wish I could rewrite this, or because you weren't the first in, on that band, so you're just coming in, taking over the material. Do you want to talk about all that?
Songs that I liked, I look forward to performing, you mean, from the old catalog?
Yeah, yeah, like, when you joined
Yeah,
Accept, because you weren't the first in it, so you're kind of
right.
adopting their material.
Well, first of all, I can tell you sheer terror, um, because the final audition for that band, and I think we talked about this, was a live performance. I was auditioning for that band for probably 8 weeks. It wasn't, you're really good. The first day I went to Dirk's studios, being the young fanboy that I was like, cool, I get to meet the Scorpions. Because I knew they were finishing Savage Amusement when I was there. And I walked into the studio, Dirk Studios, right, which I was at one time as interested in the artwork as, and I still am, but who produced it. And it seemed like a lot of these metal bands had one producer, Martin Birch, Dirks, not like, where the sound were just as important to the sound of the band, right? They were a part of the band. I walk in and there's Rudolf Schenker, kind of looked like they were arguing, him and Dieter. And I walked up as a dumb kid, hey, I'm David Reece. And blah, blah, blah. They just looked at me like I was from Mars. So be careful what stars you meet that you look up to because you may not get, the reception that you're expecting. But anyway, I was brought immediately into a studio and I hadn't slept. You know what jet lag's like, you suffered from it. It's horrible. And I walked into a 24 track room, and the bass player, Peter Baltus, who's now back with Udo, put up a 2-inch tape and played me this thing. He goes, this is kind of a working title, Sing Something. I'm like, what? It started, I mean, literally the next morning. And I went into pre production and all this stuff. And it was like, we would jam the old stuff, and I knew some of it because we bought Restless and Wild when it was on red vinyl, and a friend of mine bought that record, and we'd all go over to his band house, and he goes, "You got to come over and hear this. It's insane, right?" And Fast as a Shark, those two songs, and we all sat there doing our bong hits, looking at each other, going, "What is this? This is the Godfather. They are the Godfathers of the speed metal movement. I don't care what anybody wants to say, except kick the door open for the Slayers, the Metallicas. Those guys did it. They were the first band. But getting to performing the song, the final audition to be accepted was a secret live performance done in Cologne at a place called the Empire Club. And we had been rehearsing there the old material. And I thought that it was just, nobody ever told me anything. It was very military, like regimented kind of thing. Nobody would say yes, nobody would say no, because it was a big step. We're changing from the German tank, Udo, and this is the reason we're taking an American guy with the blonde hair. We got to cross over and break America because, Balls to the Wall did the best of all of them. And I think it hit like 400,000 copies. It's probably over a million now, but they could never crack that platinum status. So the whole corporate thing in New York got together and said, get a guy who can sing and let's break this band. We can do it. So everybody was really scared about it. And I remember I was so nervous. They said, oh, by the way, we're going to play a gig on blah, 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 March, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, what? we're performing here at the rehearsal place. They had a bar with a stage. It held about, I don't know, maybe 1,000 people, a big joint. And I'm like, okay. this is my final audition. If it doesn't work, I'm going home. You know, I pretty much figured out, so I'm going to give it everything I got. So we played Restless, London Leather Boys, Falls, all the classics. But before the gig, I remember sitting distinctively across the street in a restaurant with all of these suit and tie guys. And who walks in? Bruce Dickinson. And he's wearing a workout suit from the Bonn German Olympics fencing team. And I'm like, why is he here? And my manager said, I wanted to get his opinion. I'm like, oh my God, you know? And he's the captain of the German fencing team, right? The guy's an amazing human being, by the way. So he comes over and says hello to all the guys because they had toured together in the early 80s, you know, when he had just joined Maiden, and they all knew each other. I didn't know that. So I thought, well, I'm done. I'm done. This is it. So we kick off. Place is kind of, you know, watching me, and he's standing at the soundboard, leaning over, talking to the manager and the sound man. And halfway through the set, the place is going insane, and he's gone. So I kind of thought in my mind, well, it's not going to happen. But that was the final audition. And while I'm sitting in the restaurant, they had advertised it, Germany's biggest metal band performing one night only. So everybody knew from the media and the buzz that they had a new singer. So they knew it was us. So all these kids are standing in the rain and the cold waiting to get in. And I'm like, man, I was terrified. I mean, the biggest gig I'd done before that was 18,000 people. That was pretty scary. But this is the break, you know, this is my break. I've got to do this, or if I don't, at least I had a crack, you know? And you know about that, you know, and it's so I'm sitting there just sweating. Everybody's eating and relaxed because they've done world tours. It's no big deal to them, you know? You know what I mean? But it's everything to me, man. And it was like I blinked my eyes, it was over. And we had a guest house that we all stayed in near the studio, and we all went back. And my manager said to me, go with your girls, have your rock party, rock star night, and we'll see you in the morning. I thought, well, I'm going home, you know. So I woke up, I could hear everybody drinking coffee, and I said, well, I better go play some music and shake hands and say goodbye. I walk into the kitchen, and the manager reaches over and says, welcome to Accept. So I had the job. It was not an easy process. They had to be very careful. And the album officially bombed. I mean, there was either we love the new guy or we hate the new guy. There was no middle. But the really weird thing about that record, it's 30 something years old now, came out in 89, I think. Every show I do, and the last shows that I did were in France in December. I had never played France, Catherine, in my whole career. It was my first time. My manager's French. So he said, I'll bring you over to France. We'll do some gigs. And they were really successful. I'm not blowing my horn, but it was great. And a lot of people were saying, why haven't you come to France? We've been waiting for years. I'm like, well, I don't know. Anyways, every show I do, people come up to me with that record and say, I hated your guts, but I really want to say I love this album now. And the funny thing about my career is that my records, a lot of them don't blow out like the first year. 10 years later, they tell me how great it is. It's like this weird thing about my career that it's like, and I had people that had unopened original copies from 89 and had just bought a new one and said they had opened that and said, sign this one and just sign the plastic on the outside of this one. I love you. And I play like 4 or 5 songs in my set from that record, which everybody knows. But it's the weirdest thing, man. I was like, I went through all of this torture in the media that I broke up the band and I did all this stuff. And now everybody's telling me how much they love it. And even now, Wolf Hoffman, who never, I mean, I've gone into interviews following him in radio in different cities, and there's like a prepared interview like you've done with me today, where he'll see the Eat the Heat era and say, I'm not going to talk about that. And they're like, well, that's 15 minutes of my show. Why not? It's a big part. And I don't talk about that. So now he's saying, yeah, there's some great songs on that record. So even he is starting to say, hey, you know, don't overlook it because I'm proud of some moments on that record, he says, which is nice to read about. So yeah, that's how it all kind of happened. I mean, I got that gig on a demo tape. I was homeless, sleeping on a floor next to a propane fireplace at a woman's house named Lucy Forbes, who lived in Santa Monica. And I had done a bunch of demos. And one day I just got up and said, I'm tired of sleeping on my dirty clothes for a pillow and a sheet, freezing to death at night on the beach. I'm going to Colorado where my parents had moved. I'm getting out of here. And I left all my music there. Well, coincidentally, Dieter had flown to LA like a few days later. I said, I got a real problem. The guy we're using, there was an English guy before me. It's not working. Do you know any singers? And she goes, yeah, this guy. And when he heard that demo, he goes, that's the voice. Where is he? She said, I don't know. He split. So, like, maybe a month later, my phone rings and I'm set up doing construction. I'm doing some cowboy work in the mountains of Colorado. The phone rings and it's Wolf Hoffman. They had found me by going through the phone book, the old real ones, right? The big yellow paper, and looked for all the Reeses in Colorado and said, that's got to be it, Jack and Janet Reece. And called my dad's house and said, yeah, is David there? No, he doesn't live here. He lives in Woodland Park. Do you have his number? And that's how they found me. And of course, I thought it was a fake phone call. I mean, it's Wolf Hoffman from Accept. And yeah, I'm Mickey Mouse. And what do you want? And I'd like you to come over to Dusseldorf and audition for Accept. I said, what? That's how magical the business is. I mean, here today, gone later today, or, you can just, like you said, you run into certain people when we talked before the podcast began, and they would say, don't do this, don't do that. And things happen, and it's like chain lightning. Yeah. It's this reaction of things that happen. Without that record, you wouldn't be talking to me, I'm sure. I mean, that record I owe everything in my life to musically. Because I remember Dieter telling me one time in the studio, I'm a hot-headed egomaniac 27-year-old kid who been playing in clubs for 10 years. I thought I had it all. The problem with doing what I did was I was in cover bands, and you have to emulate those singers to make money, right? So I didn't know what my voice was. I could hit all the notes and all that stuff. And one day in the studio, he said, you can really sing well, but I've got to find your sound. What do you mean? He goes, you sound like all these other guys, like there's a Dave in there somewhere. It's my job to find it. And another thing he said that devastated me, but was the truth that I still live by. He stopped recording one night and he looked at me and said, you realize if this album fails, they're going to blame you and they're going to blame me. I said, this will never fail. This will be the best selling record of their career. He was right. But it was, when you're young and full of yourself, this cat could never happen. Well, he was right. They butchered him. They butchered me. The media, because you know how they love to go after all that's bad. They don't want to say, yeah, that wasn't that good, but this was great. They just want to focus on the hate, So,
you make a good point about that because when you come in, of course, the fans of Accept are like, why are they changing things around? So
Yeah.
you're in the hot seat, So
in Europe, pardon my interruption, but in Europe, there's one thing about them that is much stronger than the American audience. When a European act is part of their life, they don't abandon it. So the fans felt abandoned. I just went to see Saxon. 10 years ago, they were playing for 100 people in English pubs. They have resurged now, and I watched 1,500 people in an Italian club go berserk. And I looked at the manager of Girls School. I said, what has happened? He goes, I don't know, Dave. They've come back. These are loyal guys in their 50s, 60s, 70s, wearing Saxon patches, singing every song. And that's what it was. Because I asked the manager one time, what is it about Udo Dirkschneider that people they worship the guy? And she goes, he's one of them. And I went, he's a working class German guy, a factory steel worker. He's one of them. And they take that to heart. So when they put this guy with bleach blonde hair in, and they kind of take more of a makeup-y look, and they're not that heavy, they're like, what are you doing to us? The loyalty has been broken. And you can't overcome that. There's no middle.
That I understand. But also when you go back to the time in history, you're talking like the 80s, the late 80s. And historically, Germany was going through a lot of changes at that point. I mean, in the States,
Hmm.
we had Ronald Reagan. They were, there was East Germany and West Germany. And then they were like, take the wall down. And so Germany had, a lot going on at the time. So you can see how, like, they were kind of,
That that
you know?
that week I was fired. That week I was fired. That year, the wall came down. My grandmother died, and Stevie Ray Vaughan died. That week,
Oh, wow.
the changes in Germany that happened were like, well, maybe a little bit more than a week, but all in that time period. I think it was August of '89. Yeah, all of that went down in that short period of time. It was unbelievable. But I'd been to East Germany before it was free, and it was like Wolf Hoffman told me something. He goes, "I'll take you across that you'll see something about that part of Germany." I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "It's a country without color," and he was absolutely correct. It was like the gray, dark, unhappy, miserable faces. You could see it and feel it. You go back to the west side, Berlin is hopping, right? But once you cross Checkpoint Charlie, there was just this energy, man. It was black. You know what I mean? And that was when I first got there. So I was like, I got to see it. And he's like, why? And I was like, I just want to go there. So you could go in, hang out for the day, but you were being watched. You could feel it.
Wow, that's so interesting. So
Mm-hmm.
you moved on. You moved on after Accept, and you got involved in Bangalore Choir,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, I
And,
mean,
and and you are the second interview person that I'm going to break this open to. You talked about my solo career with Baptized by Fire and the guys that I'm working with. My manager, Valentin Labani, is a Frenchman, and it's rock roll music. And I had gone to France, like I mentioned earlier, and countries that I hadn't played yet. And I realized as a solo artist, people know who I am, but branding is everything in business. And I find that trying to book David Reece solo is not as easy as, like, say, a Victory or Mike Tramp's White Lion or Bonfire, except it doesn't matter who's in the band, it's the logo, right? So I said to him, I said, I need to bring back Bangalore Choir. So I'm announcing on your show. Right now I'm writing and I'm focusing. I'm trying to go back in time and recapture some of that energy from On Target. I sent you the song that you'll play later, which was an attempt a few summers ago to get there. I think I'm kind of there now. But Bangalore Choir, that story, I had the momentum after I was kicked out of Accept. And I went back to LA where nobody knew my name and nobody cared. I was just another rock guy trying to make a record and get signed. Everybody knew my face. I could go to any club. You know how it is. Doors open. Come on in. You're David Reece from Accept. I put the band together. And one thing I realized in the last few weeks of writing this new album, I'm trying to find out the magic that I was involved in then. And it's really hard to go back, right? We talked about grieving in the future now, right? I'm sitting here looking at posters and listening to that record and going, what was I thinking about? I was hungry and I had momentum. I had Stevie Nicks as manager. I had Warner Brothers Records. I had everybody. After 9 gigs, I was offered a deal from every label in the West Coast. Now, 9 gigs in California is like 9 months, but that's less than a year and big money in those days. I mean, we're not talking the pennies that they throw at you now, but I thought about it the other night and I was thinking, what was it that was so good about that record? Number one, we had an old garage with a roll up door. It was next to a police uniform company where they made the jackets for LAPD and everything. We went in that rehearsal room every night with an 8 track and we sat down and wrote songs. We jammed for a little bit, then we'd start working. And we worked and we worked. And we wrote probably 100 songs, you know? So that's something I have to recapture and I'm working on that right now. Can I do it? I don't know, but I know what those songs mean to so many people because that's another album that sort of exploded later in life, got his legs. Because I play a lot of that in my set as well, and people are singing it in countries like France and Belgium that I've never played in certain cities, right? And they're like, they know this record? Wow. And they bring it and they have me sign it. So I know that those songs had some impact. So my goal is to reach back in, and I've reached out to Kurt Mitchell, the guitar player, who's kind of retired. Danny Greenberg just passed away a few months ago, the bass player. But I think I'm close. I've got a couple of tracks that I think really work with that. But I had the momentum now. You know what I mean? I could walk, I could go anywhere, and people would open the doors. Whereas 2 years before that, I couldn't get arrested. You know.
Yeah, I
So
get it. It's interesting because I could talk about, Bangalore Choir, but my favorite album was your 2010 Cadence album. And
really,
literally, I mean, out of all of them, that's my favorite. And that was when I was doing a lot of running. And I would put on that music, and literally, I would time how far I would run to how many songs in. I knew how long each song was, and I didn't run by miles, I ran by songs. That album for me was always,
living your dreams every day, dig
yes,
deep. There's some great songs,
yes.
Martyr.
Yes, but running
Yeah,
parallel to what I was doing in my life. I was really fighting very hard with myself, and I was fighting very hard to get to things I wanted to do. So all of those songs actually were like a narrative to like pushing forward, pushing through. It's like an internal fight. And every one of those songs for me represented like kind of like somewhat of a battle. I don't know if like how you
wow.
see the lyrics, but I felt like it was a narrative for what I was doing that
That
particular
that's
time in my
that
life.
that touches me, Catherine. I've heard what you said about that record and On Target, where I've honestly heard one person said this record kept me from killing myself. And when somebody says that to you at a merch booth, it's how do you respond to that? You just hug them. And the public didn't embrace it, but people like you, I would rather one person like you say what you just said than a million people. You know what I mean? Uh, That touches me. So what I did follow up to that obviously worked because I just heard something like similar to what you said about Cadence a few days ago by my manager. And I hadn't really, and my wife loves that record as well. And Curtis is on that record playing guitars and Andy Susamil. So that's why I've reached out to Curtis because there's a certain thing between him and I that you talked about, you get you to that next mile, get you around that bend that him and I have. And that's maybe what I'm looking to do. I don't know. Thank you very much. That means a lot to me. It's about the emotion and the riff, the melody. That I'm not a musician. I dink around. I'm terrible. I'm a lyricist and a singer. And if that riff doesn't inspire me, that pen in your hand, I don't know if you do this yourself, but it's almost like the pen has its own motor and steering wheel. I wrote a song the other day called Mending Fences that it's a Elton Johnish kind of piano thing. I wrote it with Ferdy Dornberg from Axel Rudy Pell. It's a great, great song. I sat down and listened to his music and I went, give me that. And in about 10 minutes, it happened. And I've heard the same thing you're saying about cadence. You could set the piano part, you could listen to that by itself, but that piano part speaks to that title, and it's about getting over the hurdles of relationships or death or let's mend the fence. Is it possible? I think it is. This is how I would do it, but I'm going to tell you how sad I feel about it. Can we mend that fence? Put a hole, pitch that hole, and that's why I'm not your whoa whoa baby baby pops writer.
Now you have your
And it's
homework.
yeah. I mean, thanks a lot, Catherine.
Yeah, you bring up a good point though, because I have this conversation very often. I struggled in the '90s because I wasn't a fan of all the music of the 90s, right? So I would pick and choose, I even went to Woodstock that we had in 1994, which, I just recently posted, a thing about Woodstock. I found a bunch of pictures, and the biggest band for me was Aerosmith. Slash was there, but all the other bands, they're just like literally like a glaze from my memory. So when you go back to that period of time, I think a lot of people learned, like people like Chris Cornell and Soundgarden, that they were literally, so successful because it may not have been actually the sound of their music, but they were getting people to like think, or getting people to literally feel.
God, you are so right. You know what they play in this house? And the guys you were talking about earlier, the younger band? Soundgarden and Audio Slave and Chris Cornell acoustic. Chris Cornell would play here in theaters himself with acoustic guitars and sell out 5 nights. And he would do cover songs, Nothing Compares to You. He'd do Zeppelin songs. I mean, there's a story of him in Stockholm walking into a coffee shop and asking the guy, "Do you mind if I sing some songs and play guitar?" And the guy looked at him like, "You're Chris Cornell, of course." And in 15 minutes, there's 500 people inside and outside looking through the window. He had something that I tried to do some of his stuff in my acoustic set. I can hit the notes, but I cannot. And my boys are in their middle 20s. There's like this resurgence of Nirvana and Chris Cornell and Linkin Park in this house that I hear every day. And I go, man, that was really good. I think we're all just kind of butthurt, that we were kicked under the bus. And I mean, I remember standing with Piercy and Janie Lane and those guys at a pool party going, what are we going to do now? What do? We all try to wear combat boots and shorts and, right? Grunge kind of records to stay relevant.
Yeah.
And everybody knew we were faking it because that's not who we were. There's these guys that were living on the streets in a rainy, crappy city like Seattle that were real, and kids identified with it. But then 4 years later, it was over. So I kind of always knew in my heart that wouldn't stand the test of time. But what I was wrong about was it seems to have come back, especially over here. Everybody listens to that stuff. I'm like, man, I was wrong. I mean, how many people go back to Bon Jovi records? Honestly, not many. Everybody's part of that era. But you mentioned Aerosmith. I've seen the live footage of that show, The Rain. That's amazing. Metallica. And there's another band. You go to a Metallica show in Europe, one of 3 or 4 nights sold out, or Pantera. There's an age group there from 10 years old to 80. That's a bold statement. You know what I mean? I mean, it's there are certain. It's funny, how we look at bands and the stars line up, like the Ramones, right? Or the Who, or Led Zeppelin, or Sabbath. Everything just kind of comes together cosmically, and it just those 4 people or 5 people, and boom, they start something, right? Isn't that odd?
Yes. And I have
It's
this,
weird.
I know, but David, I have this theory that I've been talking about for probably the last 30 years. I have had this conversation with my very good friend, Rob Caggiano, for like, I don't know, 10 million times. But from a very little age that, I could remember being a little kid, I had this concept about people that they were universe people. So as a little kid, I saw people kind of differently. So one day, 30 years ago, I was talking to Rob and I said, you're not like everyone else. And he was like, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, there's universe people. They're placed here for a bigger purpose, and they're placed for the universe. And a perfect example of that is to look at the Beatles, right? That's my idea of a universe person. They're literally set here for the universe. So that's just my kind of
Beautiful.
story. I know. So,
It's beautiful. But the Beatles, like you said, they were universal personally and as a group. Like when you watch John Lennon do Imagine, and then I remember when he was killed, we were in Minneapolis and we had to drive to Chicago and going by the big baseball field, and there were thousands of people with candles singing "Give Peace a Chance" at like 6 in the morning, and it was just like, what happened? What? And then I met Earl Slick, and I met some of the guys that had recorded Double Fantasy with him, and they were going to go out that night for Japanese food. And they went home to shower, and Carmine Rojas and all those guys were in their hotel, and the phone rang, and he was dead. And then what Paul McCartney did with Wings. I mean, imagine you marry Linda and you don't have a record deal. You've been the biggest band in the world, and you get in a school bus and you drive around and ask colleges, can we play with a band called Wings? Wow. Wow.
That's right. So we still have a little bit more time just before we end. So you have a lot coming up, 2025 into 2026. How do you see that kind of unfolding for you?
Well, I'm very hopeful that Valentin and I don't want to manage myself anymore. I personally can't stand it. I don't like doing 500 emails a week. I need somebody doing that groundwork for me. And I have faith in him that we're going to do great things together. He's actually working with Mendoza. You mentioned him earlier.
Marco Mendoza. Yes, a good guy.
Yeah. Yeah, super guy and great story, his life. And I have two major booking agencies for the eastern side of Europe and for the western. We're focusing on quality shows. And I've also gone into where like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday are not good nights for live gigs. So I've gone into the acoustic thing. And I did that in Switzerland in December. It was unbelievable. I played Cocaine Blues. I did Trent Reznor's song Hurt that he did. I played all that stuff. And the crowd was totally silent. And I said, we're bombing. But as soon as we finished the song, the place went psycho. And they actually were listening. So logistically, it's cool because we can yank out the acoustics and play 3 nights. And then Thursday through Saturday, crush your head. Electric, right? So the plan is I kick off in September and I finish this Bangalore Choir record. And I'm working with Mario Percadani again. Mario has played with Hardline for a long time. And he understands Vince Gill and Don Henley way beyond my talent spectrum. I mean, he brings out the best. I can't sing unless the producer's behind the glass. I can go in my room and turn on my Pro Tools and, oh, that was a great take. And then somebody will listen to it and go, yeah, that's pretty good. I practice 5 days a week. I just sit here and do scales. I sing every day. I work out. We talked about it before. I gave up alcohol. It'll be 7 years pretty soon. I'm happy about that. November, I've got a tour with Girls School in Alcatraz. I think 15 shows. Last summer, I did Grass Pop. I did Czech Metal Fest. Grass Pop's 50,000 people. Limp Bizkit was there. Wolfgang Van Halen. Steel Panther. So I want to do some more of those. It's a weird thing when you do those big shows because it's like you walk behind this. You've probably been to them where the backstage is like a circus. You have to follow these tunnels with arrows to what stage you're playing, and it's kind of weird when you walk out and you got 50 minutes to prove your point. You know what I mean? And your sound man is like, he looks like he's about that tall, right? He looks like an ant, and he's out there, and you look at him and you go like that, and he goes, "It's going fine. Keep playing." I like intimate theater and club atmospheres, so that's our focus. And I want to play as many shows as possible, like everybody you talk to. You know, I mean, and give a shout out to Jack Frost for me because I think he's a great guy and a great talent. I love that guy. Is he playing with Elvis still?
Yes, they're actually leaving it. I think tomorrow they're getting on a cruise and they're going to be part
Nice.
of like a kind of an 80s. I think it's Monsters of Rock cruise. So there's a lot of
Yep.
bands that are on that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
So he'll be
Say hi
doing
for
that
me.
with Aldo. Yeah. There's so many
Yeah.
people that you and I both know. It's incredible.
Yeah. I still remember talking to you at the Chance in Poughkeepsie, hanging
Yes.
out by the moon. I remember
Yes.
that like yesterday.
Yes, I was the
Gosh, I wish that.
psychic medium for the Chance. And just this past week, they released information because they had sold the Chance after Frank and his sister Carolyn both passed away. And the people that bought it, I guess they're going to start like an art, cultural, educational center. So I think what they're doing is they're taking on students to probably run, like how to do stage management or how to kind of work in I guess, the arts. So a lot of my friends were like, well, are they going to have shows there so their students could manage the shows, So it's all to be seen, I'm just glad
God,
that,
I hope so.
they don't knock the building down. It's kind of an historic building. It was, of course, it's, always been haunted, but we'll have to see, I wrote about that book and I wrote about Frank and Carolyn, both my books. It's, a very big piece of my life, but also a piece of my life that I love because I saw people like you play there. And I saw, some bands that roll through there, like Twisted Sister and a bunch of others that, were really good friends with Frank and Carolyn, So I got to see both sides of that, the friendship part,
What was the black man's name, the stage manager? I forgot.
I think I don't know. When you mentioned that, the only person I can think of is Butch Jones. He was there all the
The big
time.
dude.
Yeah, Butchie was basically a musician himself. He was very good
Yeah.
friends with Johnny Lean. And he had played with a few people, so he's a musician himself. But I mean, he's like
I
a
played with
staple
Accept
there.
there.
Oh yeah,
And I
yeah.
remember, and I remember Ozzy had played like 2 days before, and I remember playing, and the kids were right on the stage, and I was walking on these kids' fingers.
Oh
It was
wow.
like stepping on frozen hot dogs, you know what I mean? And I'm featured, and they're not giving up; they're in it, right? And
Wow.
I remember I came back there to play, and he was sitting behind the stage, and he goes, "How you doing, Dave?" And he goes, "Good to see you again." It just had this positivity about it, And what was that Irish restaurant next door?
Oh
Remember
my
the Irish
gosh,
pub?
I know. Well, it's changed name over the years, but they called it the Nutty, and the Nutty, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I definitely want you to talk about the song. We're going to roll into the song, and I also want you to plug all your social media or the contacts for you.
Well, the song you're going to play is called Back to Life. It came out, I did an attempt at Bangalore Choir with the guys that I play with now. But as you mentioned, I took a heavier side with Baptized by Fire, and these guys come from the 90s. And I attempted to capture some Bangalore Choir vibes, and it didn't really resonate. But this is Back to Life is kind of where Bangalore Choir should be. And that's why I sent you the song, because I introduced to you that I'm doing a new album and coming out with a record in the fall. Instagram, Facebook, and David Reece Official World is called. I got a new page that you can basically just go on there and figure out what I'm up to. I've been kind of backed off and just focusing on writing good songs because I want to try and make the best record, like I always say. But I really want this record to be like Cadence was to you when you were jogging, and have people say to me, "Wow!" And I know it's in there. I know it's there.
It sure
I just have
is.
to tap it.
It sure
I
is.
have to tap it, Catherine. I gotta tap it.
So I want to roll into your Bangalore Choir song. So what is the title again?
Back to Life.
Perfect. All right. Thank you again, David. I had a great time talking to you, and we're going to roll out with your song. I love you too. Here you go.
You got nothing to hide anymore. Borderline, I'm While you're preaching, I can't compromise. You bought my soul and spine. I lost my soul and kind. Running while I'm standing in place. Turn back the hands of time. Tired of this bitter taste. Back to life. It's black and white. Ain't no need to explain. Back to life. I'm ready to fight. Leaving my stake in the claim. Whoa, that's my name. Yeah. Back to life, I look to the light. Time to get back in the game. Back to life, I'm leaving tonight. Burning my heart like a flame. That's my name, yeah. I'm burning. I'm burning, yeah.
You have been listening to Bringing the Darkness to the Light with Catherine Nadal, professional psychic medium, Dream Central Station, LLC. My audio editor is Al Hemberger at the Loft Recording Studios in Bronxville, New York. This is WNEW 102.7 FM radio.